I am here for our Thursday morning devotional on July 7th. It's the week of July 4th. I hope you've been having a good holiday week. I am recovering from COVID. Some of you may or may not know I was not able to be in person this last week in service. Instead, we pre recorded the sermon so that I could still give the message I planned on doing, which is what we're going to talk about today, the parable of the people invited to the dinner who can't come. It's this great story Jesus tells about people that are invited to this meal, a celebration, and they have all kinds of excuses why they can't come. And so Jesus then says that Master goes out and invites other people to come. And we're going to focus on a couple of things I didn't have time to deal with in the message this last weekend because I think they're really important. One of the realities of all these parables we're looking at, as we've talked about, is they have layers of things to them. And when things have layers to them, you can't always kind of peel them all the way back. You don't maybe have the time to go through all of them, and they hit you and strike you differently at different times. And so we're going to be in Luke 14, and really, once again, grateful to be with you. If you have prayer requests today, we invite you to put those in the chat box there or send them via email. It's a great way for us to connect with you. I'm getting better from COVID. I should be able to be in person this weekend. This is my 20th year of being in Durango, July, for basically the first part of July. And I found it really, I was funny. I was thinking, gosh, I arrived here in the middle of the Missionary Ridge Fire, which was at that point, one of our biggest fires. And there were fires going on around. And then my 20th year, I get COVID. So it seems about right. But like I said, I'm on the mend, getting a lot better. Our whole family's had it. So it's been just kind of one of those weird couple of weeks together as a family. And today I'm really excited to get to share with you a little bit about this parable, a little bit more than what we did this last weekend in worship. So the parable's from Luke 14, and Jesus is teaching. First of all, remember, you need to not separate the teaching from Jesus. So Jesus is gathering at this point with religious leaders, those who eventually would get so mad at him they'd want to have him killed. Because everything he talks about is a little bit different than not a little bit, a lot different than what they expected. They expected a different kind of king, a different kind of leader. And as he talks about the kingdom of God, it is not what they expected. And so he teaches them about humility and has this great text where the first will be last and the last will be first. And if you're invited to a wedding feast or a banquet, don't sit in the place of honor. And he goes through all of that before this text we're going to read today. And when he gets to the parable of the great feast, there was a man who was sitting around listening to all this. And he said to Jesus, what a blessing it will be to attend a banquet in the kingdom of God. So here's the assumption. The assumption is by those who are gathering that, when they get to attend this banquet in the kingdom of God, when God's reign comes, when God comes in all of his glory, they're all going to get to be there, and they're going to be the ones that are kind of the guests of honor almost. And Jesus is trying to kind of upend that a bit and tell them, be careful, or they might even miss this banquet. And Jesus replied with this story. We're in verse 16 now. A man prepared a great feast and sent out a lot of invitations. When the banquet was ready, he sent his servants to tell the guests, come, the banquet is ready. But they all began making excuses. One said, I just bought a field. I have to inspect it. Please excuse me. Another said, I bought 5 pair of oxen. I want to go try them out. Please excuse me. And another said, I just got married, so I can't come. The servant returned and told his master what they had said. His master was furious and said, go quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. All right, we're going to stop there. And eventually the master invites many, many others. And once again, this is an allegory. We talked about this last weekend, but an allegory means that different characters are in the story meant to represent something. So the master, the man who had the great feast, is God. And the servant, sometimes we're the servants. Sometimes we're the ones who are invited, but the ones who are invited in this story are the people sitting around. They were the religious leaders, the one that thought they were really important. Here's what's really, I didn't get to talk about this last week, but the response of the master after they all make excuses is really powerful. His master was furious. He was upset. He was angry. And here's a question I often get: well, why is he angry? And so think about this for a minute. Have you ever had a party that you put together for someone and you invited a bunch of people, and some of the people that were most important to you made excuses as to why they couldn't come or weren't willing to rework their schedule? I mean, by the way, all these excuses are valid excuses, but the fact they weren't really willing to rework their schedule a bit is what makes the master furious. And really, because what the master wanted more than anything else was just to spend time with them, to celebrate with them. They're not going to sit around and watch a movie. They're not going to sit around and not talk to. I mean, you wanted their company, if you will. And he was angry. Now, I always like to say anger and sadness are different sides of the same emotional coin. I heard that from a counselor many, many years ago, and I find it so helpful to remember. And when I meet with people who are struggling with anger in particular, I always ask them, what's the sadness underneath it? And that's really helpful in this story because, we're really what this story is about God longing to be with us, spend eternity with us, and us making excuses. We have other things. We have better things to do than spend time with God. I mean, I told you this last weekend. I do that. I'm a pastor, and yet I work for God, and so sometimes I just get busy doing for God instead of just being with God. Kind of the whole. There's that story of Mary and Martha, and how Martha was running around doing all these things, and Mary just sat with Jesus. And Jesus said, "Martha, sit down. Mary's chosen the right thing." And I think in many ways, this story is about God who longs to be with us. I said this last weekend that really this parable, this story, is about how you're loved, you're wanted, you're invited in those moments where you don't feel like you are. You are. You are. This is how God feels about us, and this is what God will do. God will go out and invite. He'll go to all the ends of the earth to find us and bring us in. But when we say no, when we make excuses, when lots of different reasons why this happens for us. I think God's heart aches. His heart is sad, and then it's angry. It's angry because God made us to be in relationship with us, and God's invited us, and yet we're like, I don't want to go. And once again, I think about those moments. Maybe you've had a party, and I told this stories last week in the message about sixth grade and being um, not invited to parties or and feeling uninvited at times because I didn't fit in. I just moved there, and I've also had birthday parties where because I was new, not everybody came. Or I can remember a particular one party where one of the kids I really wanted to come didn't come for some, and it was probably a good reason. And at first I was really sad, and then I got angry and I got mad. And this is what happens to us. Our sadness turns to anger really quickly and easily, and then it's not constructive. In this story, what I love is that the anger of God becomes a righteous anger. That anger brings purpose and meaning to the story because out of that anger comes this kind of message to us that, hey, yes, we're special on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're not. We're like everyone else. We're invited, we're loved, we're wanted, we're unique, and God sees us as unique. But then everybody else is invited too. And then what brings purpose and meaning is that the servant then gets to go out and invite even more, invite others. And really we see the purpose and the meaning of the whole parable because of the people who said no. You see, here's the other part of this story I want to just kind of end with, which is this: that God can take anything, any moment, any brokenness in our lives, and turn it into a feast, a banquet, a place where there's a party, a celebration, even. No matter what hurt there is, no matter what pain there is this opportunity, if you will, to have it be transformed. And that's what happens in the story, right? In the story, there's nobody there. It's an empty banquet. It's an empty banquet. And then it gets transformed into this amazing thing because of God, the anger of the master, but also the willingness to go out and to take that moment and change it and bring about meaning, purpose for all the others who were out there who were poor, who are crippled, who are blind, who are lame, those who are outside. By the way, that list is meant to describe those. In some ways, it's illegal for them to go to the temple. It's illegal for them to go to church and worship. And God says, they are all, and everyone is invited. Go to the country lanes, behind the hedges, people who are hiding, maybe wondering if they're going to get invited, and invite them in. And then he said, for none of those I first invited will even get the smallest taste of my banquet. And here's the rub in this story, the part that makes us uncomfortable. It's up to us to say yes. God's not going to force any of us to come. This is an invitation. God's not going to drag us to a party we don't want to go to. And so really, this story has, again, multiple layers to it. But at the deepest layer is this idea of purpose and meaning, and that God can take our sadness, our anger, our hurt, whatever it is, and will bring about a celebration, a great feast, if you will. Let's think about this more pragmatically. This last week, I was meeting with someone who lost a loved one to suicide, and just the heartache and the heart and the wrenching and the ache and the pain and the hurt that comes from that kind of loss. That I tell people, when a loss happens that's so deep and traumatic like that, it does change us. It shapes us. It makes us different, and not necessarily better or worse, but just we're different. And this person, as a result of that, decided to serve others who are going through that same thing. And it was really interesting and powerful to hear them talk about how this loss, this traumatic kind of gut-wrenching thing, has given them a sense of purpose, and a deeper sense of a love for God in particular, and that God's love for them is deeper and richer, and they recognize that God didn't take their loved one from them, that God doesn't punish people who have taken their life. It's not, there's this idea of a mortal sin that came around at some point in the church way back when. Really, it was kind of to prevent people from taking their own life, but God doesn't abandon us in our deepest and darkest moments. And so really, our purpose comes even in the middle of these dark and difficult moments, even those moments where we're out, we feel like we're poor, we're crippled, we're blind, we're lame, we're hiding behind a hedge, and yet God comes. And here's the part of this story I love. It's going to match up with what's going to happen, and just the next chapter, which we're going to focus on this next week, which is the parable of the lost things. That the master sends the servant to come and look for us when we feel blind, crippled, lame, poor, lost, uninvited, unloved. That there's this place, this idea that God will come and find us even there. This is beautiful image, really. It's a beautiful image that is the deepest level of this, that we find meaning, we find purpose, we find value because God comes to us and finds us and longs for us to come and join this banquet, this feast. So what is a moment or this week or in your life where you felt uninvited, unloved, unwanted? And can you see maybe glimpses of where God has reached out to you in those moments? Maybe people who have come alongside of your life and your heart. I was thinking about my great-grandmother, Grace Berry. I've told stories of her before. She was in her 80s when she came to be my nanny. And she's the one who introduced me to a lot of the parables, a lot of the stories that we're hearing. She would read them to me at times. But she was one of the people that, when we moved, after we had moved, I didn't have a lot of friends. And she was one of the people that just assured me it would be okay and that God still loved me and she would always love me and my family would love me, and gave me something to carry, something to hold on to. So what are you holding on to? Maybe when things get sad or hard, or when there's anger or sadness underneath it. Here's what I know, that I think God longs to meet us in those. God longs to come to us, to reach out to us when we feel like we're in that place. That's what this parable is about, and invite us to the greatest feast ever. To know that at the end in our life it's not defined by that place where we feel uninvited. Our life is about knowing that we were made by God to be loved by God. And as we carry that, then we can carry that message to others. as I talked about this last week, what happens is we eventually become the servant, going to those in those places. Um, we go to them in lots of different ways in our church and our ministry. And, one of the things I'm excited for at the end of July, at the end of this month, Dasha and Joe, who are the two of the they're teachers in Ukraine, and they've been in Ukraine. Dasha's from Ukraine. She's from Mariupol. We've heard a bit of her story in worship a few weeks ago. Her husband is Joe. He's from Bayfield, and they're here in town during July, and they're going to come and spend time with us and share with us a bit about their story. And one of the things that you're going to hear from Dasha is how she really felt called to be there and just be the kids they teach are kids who are orphans, and they help them literally escape the country and get from one place to another. And they were the ones that showed up with the invitation. They were the servants. They came. That's one powerful, profound way that we serve, but there's so many other ways, little small ways. And with this, I was visiting someone in hospice recently, and one of the small ways that someone was bringing them an invitation, like this servant, was a friend who came to see them in the hospice house and came with a blanket to lay over them, to pray with them, and to encourage them on this final journey home. And this person didn't really remember their friend very well because they had a stroke and some other things. And I just found myself thinking at that moment as I visited, we brought communion to them and to their family. And as we did that, I was just thinking about how we're invited to this feast in so many different ways and places. At the very end of our life, we're stepping from this life into the next. That's where the invitation is most palpable, most powerful. And that's where I think God meets us, in those moments. And I pray that will happen for you, whatever moment you're in right now, whatever place you might be in, that you might discover that truth. So once again, if you have a prayer request or something, please let us know that. What I hope for most of all is that you would remember this truth, that God made you to love you, that there's an invitation, that sometimes when there's anger, it's because there's sadness underneath. And in the middle of that, we can find meaning, we find purpose, we find, that God can transform these moments when we feel poor, crippled, blind, lame, out behind the hedges, hidden. And out of that, we can be invited. And one of the ways that happens is through this psalm, which describes that. We live in the mountains here in Durango, and I love this psalm, but it also speaks to this deep truth that we've talked about today. So I invite you to hear these words as we close. From Psalm 121. I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. God will not let you stumble. The one who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, God who watches over Israel never slumbers, never sleeps. The Lord himself watches over you. The Lord stands beside you as your protective shade. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord keeps you from all harm, watches over your life. The Lord keeps watch over you as you come, as you go, when you're poor, crippled, blind, lame, out behind the hedges, when you feel uninvited, unloved, unwanted. God watches over you and invites you to experience in the middle of whatever anger or sadness, this amazing, great feast, both now and forever. I pray you will discover that. And I look forward to seeing you this weekend in worship or whenever our paths cross again. Blessings to you, and have a wonderful week. Go in peace and serve God.